Ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all to the newest game show this side of the bunker, Protag Punch Out! In this state of being, I will be going through different categories of horror games and pulling out their protagonists to see how they fare in a 1v1 brawl. Weapons will be disallowed, but the verdict shall only be revealed through hand-to-hand combat to see if strength, tactics, or anything else will be enough to save them from another monster. Though, considering those I'll be up against, it only seems fair that I take on the form of a human to some degree. Here is a drawn version of what I'll be depicted as when facing off against those unknowing combatants. Rather regular, but still no skinny pushover. As mentioned prior, I have two different categories in mind for which to draw from, and ultimately they happen to be psychological and action, with the number of entries for each being relatively the same. We have spacemen, policemen, and children? Did we get an official sign-off for this? Who am I kidding? I'm alone on this set. Regardless, we'll let you know of the world these traumatized tributes come from before seeing how they hold up against my humanoid caricature. They'll have their winners and losers section, but also a middle ground if I feel like it could go either way. May the fight be forever fair and entirely entertaining. For our first category, we have psychological horror, which typically relies on clever tactics and better written stories to lure the player into a state of unease instead of throwing them into tense runaways or when forcing jump scares in their face. Usually a lot more can be done with the medium and can leave a greater impact thanks to the atmosphere and ideas sticking with the player long after they put down the game itself. Who's to say what happens next and how it affects our combatants, considering there's plenty which ways they can go during the length of the story at hand. Our first contender, or contenders in this case, would be Andrew and Ashley from the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. Both characters come from quite the rough background, considering during the length of their game these siblings face off against organ harvesters and assassins who want to make sure they don't take another breath. At the same time, the both of them have taken their fair share of lives, whether directly or indirectly, so they aren't above soul-sucking or straight murder if it comes down to it. That being said, this has always been done with some sort of preparation in hand first, like the demon circle and talisman, or needing a weapon such as a cleaver or gun to get the jobs done. Obviously, there would be no time for the former, and the latter is barred from being used, so it sets them both in a scenario they aren't quite used to being in. That being said, they do have numbers on their side. A 2v1 is certainly no easy undertaking, and it could be argued that the two could coordinate an attack where one distracts or lashes out, whilst the other sneaks up behind to take a cheap shot at the back of the head, Logan Paul style. All of this does come with the drawback of the both of them not being in their peak condition, as they live on the run and don't exactly eat lavishly, besides the occasional snack, disgusting soda, or human stew. It's safe to say that despite all that the two could pull off, they aren't exactly in the best shape to be taking any fights, considering how weak and tired they would be going into it. Not only that, but they would no doubt be just as fragile, making any direct hit something to elicit a stagger, which could be followed up on. With that done twice, they stand no proper chance without their tricks. From the outer reaches of space comes our second contestant, the lethal employee from Lethal Company. Being from a company which is constantly sending them out on trips to retrieve scraps from buildings which were once fully functional, now swarmed with monsters, it's safe to say that they aren't one to be put down easily. The employee can fall quite a ways and survive, take multiple strikes from enemies such as thumpers and baboon hawks, or have mini explosions go off in front of them, only to be able to run away after the fact. Their level of endurance is remarkable above everything else, making this encounter be rather one-sided, considering they could no doubt take quite a beating before dishing out quite the amount of pain themselves. If they can survive getting hit with a shovel or road sign, I doubt being punched is gonna do much before I get put down first. So it's safe to say that I don't stand a chance against the employee. From their endurance to their strength, considering how much could be carried by one of them, it's no surprise that they could easily beat me in a brawl. On a more somber note, here comes our third contestant, being Brad from Lisa the Painful. Considering this is where he is best portrayed in a fighting sense, when looking back through his long tale of despair. Brad comes from a wasteland of madness and manliness, considering there are no women left at the start of his game, save for a singular child, which he raises the best he can. It is overbearing, and he eventually is forced out on a mission to save her upon their disappearance. Throughout said adventure, he is forced to fight some who have been consuming certain amounts of a drug known as joy, to which he himself is consumed too. It's a drug that not only acts as a health item in game, but causes mutations within the user after only a couple doses, making it rather deadly, but also useful as the mutant on their most innermost desires. As you can probably tell, yanking Brad away from his quest would only set me down a path of pain and inevitable death, whilst not even considering the raw strength he possesses regardless of the pills, considering he spent many years in a world of chaos where man kills man. There is no chance that I live long enough to throw a single punch at the guy, so this is pretty open and shut. Getting ready for a swing with no miss, the batter from off becomes our fourth contestant. Now, whilst I'm not as clued up as I used to be, considering quite some time has passed since I've seen the batter in action, it's something that can easily be gone over. When crossing through the zones of Off's world, the batter acts in order to purify it when taking on spectres and zone guardians through the help of his baseball bat or add-ons. All zones are different with themes or general beliefs of that area's civilization, with one being more factory-based and another resembling a suburb with a shopping mall or other entertainment. It's an interesting world that certainly preps the batter to take on a world similar to our own, considering how the parallels line up in the story. That being said, how does it reflect back on a 1v1? Removing the bat, the batter still maintains his add-ons and thus can be boosted during a brawl, which, paired with his athletic build and preferred sport, makes this a run in the park for the challenger, considering he could easily evade jabs whilst punishing for overstepping or getting sloppy. There is no way he loses this, considering the range of zone guardians and how to deal with them. Now, flipping from fact to fiction, Omori from Omori slashes in as our fifth contestant. And I do mean Omori, not Sunny, considering the former retains some power, whilst the latter is just a normal kid to some extent. That being another thing I have to go over, considering Omori is a child, which also brings into contention the ethics of fighting children and if they would be able to hold their own regardless of power or not. It's something I'll be considering going forwards, but this is our first feral child to have to deal with. Getting back to it, Omori ventures through a land of fantasy with his friends from the real world and his sister who spent her time at the picnic basket. As more time goes on with Omori beating out bosses and conquering spaces once guarded by fear so he can progress, but for the most part he's dealing with fantasy, if not humanoid figures, that he still tears down all the same. With each level up grants new abilities, but when excluding those that likely need a knife to perform, it still leaves a plethora of possibilities for how to deal with the opposition. Dealing with Omori's rules reveals that becoming sad increases defense but lowers speed, becoming angry increases attack but lowers defense, and becoming happy increases speed and luck but drops hit rate. However, Omori only has the chance to inflict sadness here, so where do we go? If Omori uses sad poem, then I'd become sad, and paired with stare means that I'd barely be able to move much, if not being a punching bag for whatever is thrown from his arsenal. Exploit, red hands, vertigo, cripple and suffocate would likely deal any number of damage to me, with a single slap being only needed if it had to end in a physical strike. It's surprisingly one-sided, and why I don't want to discount all horror kids considering what is in store. Though it can be unfair, it isn't something I want to scribble out, considering it's not something that is just easily taken away. A man of misery Maya's our show now, as Jimmy from Mouthwashing is dragged in as our sixth contestant. Spending his time as a guy shipping goods for Pony Express on the freighter space shuttle known as the Tulpar, he isn't all too noticeable at first, since he doesn't stand out that much. In a fist fight, I would probably be able to lay out Jimmy, considering he isn't doing much on the Tulpar, so he likely isn't training daily or doing much athletically, making this an obvious result for who takes the win. Myself simply because I have more power behind my swings, considering I'm packing partial pudge, and that I stand at about 6'1". Compared to Skin and Bones over here, who is on the thin rations, I'd say that my odds are far better than his. If I may spoil things in the story, Jimmy's strength lies within manipulation and how he preys on those he could control, more or less abusing his position as either a man when it comes to taking advantage of Anya, or the rest of the crew for that matter, when appointing himself captain and using that to manipulate Daisuke down the line when it comes to spiking Swansea. That's all without even mentioning his friendship with Curly, which is how his sexual assault of Anya goes largely dismissed, and the crew ends up stranded in space. Safe to say it won't help him in a beatdown, and after such, he will be tossed into the nearest cell, as long as he doesn't grab a gun first. Swiftly swiveling around to our second category, which is far more hands-on, action horror, bringing those that have dealt with the undead to those who have discovered that which is unholy. These protagonists are nothing to scoff at and bring quite the fury no matter where they go. I'll certainly have to bring quite the A game if I want to survive against the phenomenal power which comes crashing down Punch-Out Lane. From zombie slaying to mutant murdering, Leon Kennedy comes in as our 7th contestant, and I won't beat around the bush here, it ain't looking good. On the surface, Leon is far above my punching grade, considering his role as a police officer and his vast encounters with the undead who prove to be greater threats than I. At that point I serve no issue when being dispatched, considering the chosen infection of Resident Evil also creates creatures of nightmarish design to which he is also taken down and taken blows from. There are many more examples to reach from as well, since Leon is far more agile, and after fighting against numerous human threats such as Jack Krauser, who's predicted to be 15 times stronger than the average man. I'm sure Death Battle doesn't mind helping out this competition by letting us reference from their analysis. At the end of the day, armed or not, Leon wouldn't be afraid to knock me down in a heartbeat. With morals out the window and his legs to boot, Sint of Endoparasitic crawls into our 8th contestant spot. Compared to our former entry, this is no competition, considering Sint is a near quadriplegic, having only one arm and having to crawl all over the place during the game's duration. Sure, he cleared out a whole laboratory of parasitic entities, but that was largely due to the mass amounts of firepower left around during the initial outbreak. To some extent, he's only alive due to the convenience of it all. However, since no weapons are allowed, he's fresh out of luck, and technically on a time limit, since a parasite is working its way up to his head, which will then explode outwards, killing him instantly. I don't have to really throw a punch, considering I could just sit on his back till his cranium bursts. So this will be both the most pathetic and easy to decide out of every match up to this point. Dragging us down to the depths, we get the Prisoner of Pressure, sinking us down into the 9th contestant position. Now, I'm certainly curious to check the capability of the prisoner due to how much damage they can handle during one playthrough before being put out of commission. The underwater world of Pressure is deadly and not at all forgiving, as your only saving grace is luck, your allies, or the fan favourite Sebastian Solus, with everything else happily lending a hand to put them down. Wall Dwellers, Angular Variations, Pandemonium, and the Multi-Monster will decimate them in one singular strike. Squiddles, Infestation, and Good People only deal varying amounts of damage, but they hurt regardless. That's without taking into account that they don't seem all too phased by getting thrown about if they climb onto Sebastian's body and landing with quite the impact. This leads me to believe that winning against the prisoner would be an impossible task, considering how durable they are, with no obvious injuries. Even then, they have the strength to break vent plates off their hinges, break the hold of void masses whilst they're trying to consume other teammates, and hold lockers shut against the strength of Pandemonium. Safe to say, they could knock me down and power through any swings I could actually land on the other. Telling a tale of the dead rising once more, Lee, Javier, and Clementine all come together from The Walking Dead for the 10th contestant position. They won't all be together, but one by one, considering they are the stars of their own games, if not appearing elsewhere to assist the main character. Starting with Lee, I feel as though it would fall in his favour, mostly for his established strength rather than his durability. It isn't surprising that Lee gets into confrontations with both humans, but also the undead, so a power struggle is something he's used to now, but the most standout thing would be his single-man crusade through the Horde. With the adrenaline pumping, he was able to cleave and cut his way through zombies which, even if rotten, are still gonna require a lot of power to break through muscle, organ and bone, all the while being bitten and starting to wither away at that. Safe to say, without being in a weakened state, he could probably knock me down if the adrenaline starts pumping and he gets into the same headspace as when he was heading to the Marsh House. Javier kinda falls into the same category as the Batter, previously mentioned in the off segment, just without the supernatural abilities that came with it. Sure, he's been off the green for a while considering he got suspended for betting on himself, but he still holds up as an athlete considering he starts the game running after ditching his car on the freeway. So for the most part, Javier would be able to strike more quickly and outlast me in a fight if it did come down to endurance, but even then, he's used to swinging a bat around, so striking with plenty of force and a punch definitely edges out over myself. Another win for the Walking Dead team. But what about our last? Clementine is the character who appears most in the series and gets the most experience as such, which provides her with enough training to absolutely thrash me whilst taking the brunt of whatever I can deal out. For research, I found a whole thread describing the many feats that Clem achieved in all walks of life, which aren't limited to stabbing a bandit in the shoulder with a branch, launches a dog with enough velocity to impale it on a tent frame, gets bit deeply by the same dog which tears open her forearm, gets 2 of her fingers crushed in a car door but still manages to kill an approaching walker, charges Abel through a large set of double doors, knocks out Minerva with only 2 punches, the entirety of the season 4's ending, and many other things that I haven't listed here. Suffice to say, I have no chance to win, especially since Clementine could always strike at my legs and get me to stumble or fall to a knee, since I wouldn't expect such a move in a fist fight. Such a massive amount of combat experience is just too much for me to properly counteract. Demons draw near, and this one human too, featuring Enri and Ebel of the Purgatory series, placing our final 2 in the 11th contestant spot. I won't bother with Enri too much, considering she has demon strength and would shatter my face to the back of my skull, considering she forced a blunt meat cleaver into an android's armoured head. Now, Ebel, on the other hand, is curious in his own right. Considering he gets plunged into a laboratory of many different demon specimens, Ebel definitely benefits from being both smart and somewhat of a blooming tactician with how he instructs Enri against the flood of demon spiders. He even outsmarted Oliver, a cyborg with explosive armor and an antimatter rifle, by using his lack of touch against them, and had another demon take over his mechanical body. Being shorter means it'll be harder to hit him, but no doubt one strike would knock him down if he doesn't think of something in time to retort with. That being said, Ebel isn't a pushover in strength either, considering he slammed a demon spider into a wall with a metal pipe, which is no easy task to do considering they're bred to be killing machines which tear apart humans in seconds. In that regard, I would be confident in the fact that I would have to land the first punch, otherwise Ebel would read me like a book and take me down in one precise attack that would minimize how many swings he'd need to do and thus limit how many openings would be granted. Ultimately, it's a toss-up that I'm unsure of who would actually win, so I'll leave it as our only tie considering how close it would be for either side. After a raging competition of analysis and pitting many protagonists against a simple human, we come out with a singular win, a singular draw, and 9 whole losses. Whether it be from a mix of the supernatural, being hardened by the world they inhabit, or simply being far more macho than I, they certainly aren't dragging their feet when it comes to horror protagonists. Whilst I do have many L's under my belt, I didn't want to cast my net too far, considering if I wrote in games such as the Strange Men series, Our Oni, or Faith, it would simply result in a brawl that focuses on 2 humans, more or less. At least if I went for duos or those who thrive in a horror setting, it would provide an interesting gaze into how someone regular would beat against those who has suffered. As it stands, there is potential for a spin-off series to take hold where my shape-shifting skills take over instead and I fight the main antagonist of the games mentioned above, or tie in a different villain that would provide an interesting opponent. You would get a rundown of course, but I would need to compile a file where I don't share too much. You never know who's watching, and I don't intend to be caught off guard. In any case, I've been VincentSkullMan, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully.